hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving break. We just finished up interest groups, and now we're moving to political parties, which are eerily similar to interest groups. But the first thing I want to show you is the political party of yesteryear. You gotta love this. This is such a good dad joke for a political party. Am I right? Look at that boombox. Anyway, all right, I digress. Okay, let's first of all talk about what political parties are and who they are. And I'm not trying to insult your intelligence with this, but political parties, what are they and how do they differ from interest groups? Okay, and who are they? Uh, let's start with this, and this will mix on your outline parts 1A and 1B. Political parties are groups who have the primary goal of electing candidates to office. Okay, I'll say it again for you. Political parties are a group of people, a group of like-minded people who are there to elect candidates to office. Okay. Now they want to influence policy like groups do, but their primary goal is to get people elected because they're like, hey, we can't even do any influencing if we don't get people elected. All right. And you're going to see there's some other subtle differences between the two. All right. So that's the main goal of a political party. That's what they are, a group of like-minded people trying to get folks elected into office. Now, that's what they are, but who they are in America, there are two main political parties in the United States, okay? The Democrats and the Republicans, all right? I'm sure you've heard of them at some particular point. And these political parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans, are what we call umbrella parties, okay? Umbrella parties, all right? And there are two different types of political parties. American political parties are these umbrella parties, and over in Europe and in Asia, they have what are called, or what we refer to as, ideological parties. All right, and here's the difference between the two. Okay, umbrella parties incorporate a large group of different people into their party. And not all of them have a lot in common. And I'm going to show you that here in a second when I switch to the video of me with working on stuff on the board. Okay. Umbrella parties have broad goals and broad values. Ideological parties are different. They are smaller political parties who have a narrow set of values and a narrow set of beliefs, and you're expected to go along with that. Okay, so umbrella parties, I'm about to show you the difference between the two. Okay, everybody, I hope you can see me now, and I wanted to show you this. This is the Democratic umbrella party, okay? And you draw your umbrellas how you want to, but here's how I draw my umbrella, all right? And when we say there are umbrella parties, there are lots of groups under the Democratic umbrella, okay? So for example, one group that tends to be very democratic, we would say like union workers, okay? Union workers, definitely in that particular group, okay? But see, Democrats also include other individuals and other groups within that too. For example, you get under the umbrella of Democrats, feminists. And you also get the LGBT community. All right? Who else would be under the Democratic umbrella? I'm glad you asked that question. Start thinking about this. Traditionally Catholics. Jews, right? Hispanic people, except for the Cubans. Right? Who else falls under this Democratic umbrella? Hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of a pattern develop, by the way. All right? You got environmentalists. Oh, that's interesting. There's a lot of people, a lot of different groups under the Democratic umbrella. All right? And one of the things that I want you to see here is that these groups, even though they're under the umbrella of Democrats, they don't always have a lot in common. Like, for example, can you imagine an environmentalist and a union worker sitting down to have a beer together? Or like, and somebody from the LGBT community sitting down with a traditional Catholic Hispanic. All right? Look, the umbrella party says we're going to try to incorporate as many different groups into our political party because there's strength in numbers, all right? And we know that we have a better chance if we work together and we can agree on broad sets of principles. All right, this is how an umbrella party works. So there are other groups under the umbrella here as well, all right? And you're going to see that in a minute. You would also say you've got your pro-choice crowd. Okay? Other individuals, you would say that people who are, gosh, I don't want to necessarily lump all people into this particular community, but you can see how various groups might fall into the Democratic umbrella. And here's the weird thing about it, okay? This umbrella of people is not the same as it once was, all right? You would also include in here minorities, particularly like racial minorities like Black Americans. Okay? And look, that's a broad set of people that all work together for some common values, all right? Now, that's not to be too dissimilar from the Republican umbrella, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Let's take a look at the Republican umbrella, and it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the groups that make it up. And so, for example, you would say that like one of the biggest blocks of Republican voters, the people they can't do without, like Southerners. Right? Southerners make up a pretty big contingent of the Republican Party under this umbrella. All right, and beyond that, you've got some other groups that mix in that don't, that you wouldn't necessarily think would really have a lot in common with Southerners. Like, for example, Mormons. Okay, the Mormons out in Utah, remember, they're very conservative on their beliefs, right? And let's throw in another group here just for fun, the Cubans. Can you imagine? It sounds like an odd, quirky nature here. A Cuban, a Mormon, and a Southerner all sit down together to have a cup of coffee. Right? That's a little bit strange. Of course, the Mormons don't like caffeine, but that's another story for another day. All right? So what else could we throw under the Republican umbrella here to an extent? You also get like a lot of West Virginians, and in this regard, we have what we would call social conservatives. A lot of people here in West Virginia, they identify with the socially conservative values of the Republican Party, but they don't necessarily identify with their economic values. However, they have decided that the social views of conservatives are more important than the economic views, and so they tend to vote Republican. Okay? You also get, for example, what we would call Christian conservatives, mainly like the Baptists, rural folks in general. All right? We could also get the business owners. All right, and hopefully you see that this umbrella is kind of like the Democrat umbrella, okay? In that these groups of individuals, they don't necessarily have a whole lot in common, all right? And you look at, it, and this group, this umbrella, has just enough in common to where they say, hey, we can work towards similar goals, okay? And the same thing is true of Democrats. They're like, hey, we have just enough in common to where we can pursue some policies that will benefit all of us, all right? And so think of these as more like a coalition, an alliance together to work towards similar policies. Because, for example, Baptists know that, hey, we can't get necessarily a lot done on our own, but if we get other people who have some similar viewpoints, like Baptists don't necessarily, agree with business owners on a lot of perspectives, but they're like, hey, we have enough in common to where we'll work together under the umbrella of the Republican Party. Okay? Now, something that I want you to be aware of, specifically with these umbrella parties, okay, is that the groups under the umbrella parties, they're not the same groups all the time. Every so often, they switch sides. Can you think of any group under the Republican umbrella that hasn't always been this way? All right? And if you, and I kind of gave a subtle hint, Southerners have not always been part of the Republican umbrella. They switched, all right? After the Civil War was over, in particular, they started moving in a different direction. And especially after 1968, you're going to see Southerners completely switch sides and completely abandon the Democratic Party. Now, the same is true with Democrats and Black Americans, okay? Black Americans were not always associated with the Democratic Party. Remember, they initially sided with the Republicans after Abraham Lincoln and Republicans free the slaves. They helped end slavery in the South. And so Groups can switch sides every so often. All right, and we said, for example, some of these people, like West Virginians, who are these social conservatives, they haven't always been with Republicans. The same is true for Democrats, though. The people who are Black Americans, they not only switch sides, but then you have to start looking in the future and what could potentially happen with these umbrella parties. Catholics, for instance. Catholics on the issues of same-sex marriage, on the issues of abortion, they're under the Democratic umbrella right now, but they're very uncomfortable with their positions in that particular case. So you might see them switching sides in the future, right? Another group that might find itself under one umbrella or the other, Muslims, right? Muslims have a lot of values, at least conservatively, in terms of their social views. They'd probably fall into this block, but at the same time, Republicans don't always have the most Muslim-friendly policies. Right? And so right now, the Muslims, they may be conservative in some aspects, but they may start moving towards the Democratic umbrella. Okay? So these umbrella parties incorporate lots of groups of individuals, but they're not always guaranteed to stay that way. In the broader sense, we mentioned specifically that they have a main goal of trying to get people elected to office. And our political parties here are umbrella parties, and that differs from other countries because they use ideological parties. All right. So you go over to Europe and you see specifically a political party that says, hey, we have a very specific belief system. And if you're part of our political party, we definitely expect you to be on board with all of our issues. So, for example, like in our parties here, maybe Democrats, like not all Democrats are going to be supporting certain feminist values. Maybe somebody who's a steel worker isn't on board with feminist values, and that's okay. Okay. But at the same time, like if you're in a political party in Europe, it's a more narrow political party that says, hey, we have a certain set of beliefs that we're going to try to get enacted into government policy, and you better be on board with all of them. All right. So those ideological parties in Europe, you get more of them. All right. Whereas here we have two big monstrous parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. All right. Over in Europe and in Asia and other countries, they say, look, you Americans are the weirdos. We have specific political parties, and not only that, that usually translates to them having more political parties. One of the things I put on your outline, if you look on page 475 in your text, there's a little graph, a little chart that shows you the number of political parties in other nations, and you'll see that we are the strange ones. Here, we do it a little bit differently. We like to think what we do is normal, but the reality is that we're not the normal ones. We're the exception to the rule. So you'll go over to, say, like Germany, and there are 10 to 15 political parties who are active in trying to get their policies enacted, and that's not unusual. Right? Here, we're like, hey, we've lumped everybody into one of two categories. Okay? Over there, like we're broad and very wide in terms of incorporating groups into the umbrella. Over there, they are much more narrow in their issues. Okay? So, for example, you go over to Germany and they've got like a socialist party. All right? And if you are a member of the Socialist Party, you're expected to be on board with everything that they think and everything they believe.